The fluorescent lights of the grocery store hummed a tired tune. It was past 10, and the place had that late-night emptiness, just a few souls drifting through the bright aisles. Anya moved slowly, her body heavy with exhaustion. She had just finished a 14-hour day, a brutal marathon of paperwork, budget meetings, and the gnawing details of a cold case that wouldn't let her go. Her mind was still back in that dusty file room, not here among the cereal boxes and laundry detergent dot. She just needed something quick. Her stomach reminded her she hadn't eaten since a rushed sandwich at noon. She grabbed a pre-made salad, a bottle of water, and then, as an afterthought, a small, cheerful bouquet of yellow sunflowers. A peace offering. Her wife had texted, a simple, "Hope your day was okay. Dinner's in the fridge." Anya felt the familiar pinch of guilt. Another missed meal, another late night. The flowers were a small, bright, "I'm sorry." She headed to the self-checkout, the only lane open. Beep. The salad scanned. Beep. The water. She placed the bouquet on the scanner. Nothing happened. She tried again, turning it, looking for a barcode that wasn't there. A faint sigh escaped her lips. The machine was stubborn, unhelpful. In her bag on the floor was a new phone charger, still in its plastic shell, bought yesterday. She thought she might as well scan it too. She pulled it out, ran it over the laser. Another error message blinked on the screen. Frustration bubbled up, a small spark in her sea of tiredness. She looked around for a clerk, but the one attendant was helping an elderly man with a complex coupon situation. Anya's phone, buried in her hoodie pocket, vibrated loudly. It was her lead detective. This could be about the case. She answered without thinking, the charger still in her hand. "Talk to me," she said, tucking the phone between her ear and shoulder. "Captain, we might have something." A witness from the old liquor store robbery just walked in. He's nervous, but he's talking. Anya's entire focus narrowed to the voice on the phone. The grocery store faded into a blur. Is he solid? What's he saying? She listened intently, nodding as if the detective could see her. On autopilot, her free hand gathered her scanned items, the salad, the water, and placed them in a plastic bag. The flowers finally did scan. She paid the total that appeared on the screen, cash from her pocket, her movements quick and distracted. The unscanned charger, still in her hand from trying to price check it, was absently tucked into the bag with her groceries. It was a simple, tired mistake. A thing in her hand while her mind was miles away, chasing a break in a 2-year-old case. She walked out of the store, the phone still glued to her ear, the plastic bag swinging from her crooked elbow. The night air was cool. She was already strategizing, thinking about the next steps for the interview. What questions to ask that she didn't. Noticed the 2 young police officers leaning against their marked cruiser in the far corner of the lot. And she certainly didn't see the store's loss prevention officer, watching from just inside the glass doors. Point directly at her. Officer Reed saw a woman in a dark hoodie, jeans, looking down, talking fast on a phone, walking quickly to a nondescript sedan. He saw the hurried exit, the lack of a visible receipt. It fit the pattern they'd been briefed on. Solo shopper, late hour, using the self-checkout to avoid human interaction. "Let's go," he said to his partner, Carson. Their boots crunched on the asphalt as they moved to intercept her, just as she reached her car door. "Ma'am?" Officer Reed called out, his voice firm, official. Anya, halfway into her car, turned, the phone still at her ear. She held up a single index finger, the universal sign for 1 minute. Into the phone she said, "Hold on, I've got a sec." She wasn't being defiant. She was being a captain in the middle of a critical briefing. Her mind was still back at the precinct. Officer Carson stepped closer. "Ma'am, we need you to come back inside with us." Right now, please. Anya finally looked at them, really looked. Young, fresh-faced, eager. She didn't recognize them immediately. The precinct was big, and she'd only been captain for a few months. She lowered her phone. "What's this about, officers?" she asked, her voice shifting into a calm, measured tone she used on scene. "Store security says there's an issue with your purchase. We need to clear it up inside," Reed said, gesturing back towards the bright entrance. Anya almost laughed, a short, tired breath. It was absurd. "Officers, there's no issue. It's a misunderstanding. I'm actually on duty right now." It was true, in her world. A captain was never truly off the clock. Carson reached out and gently, but firmly took her elbow. "The manager would like to speak to you. It'll be faster if you just come with us." That touch, the assumption of control, startled her. The reality of the situation began to pierce her professional haze. She was being detained. For what? A bag of salad and some flowers? She thought of the charger. A cold, small knot formed in her stomach. Asterisk, did I? No, I paid, didn't I? Asterisk resisting would only make it worse. Protocol was protocol, even if it was being misapplied. "All right," she said, her voice now tight. "Let's go clear this up. Quickly." She ended her phone call, sending a quick text. "Detained. Grocery store. Minor issue. Stand by." She slipped the phone into her pocket, a wave of humiliation beginning to heat her cheeks as the two officers escorted her. A woman in a hoodie, back into the glaring light of the store, where the manager waited with a stern, expectant face. The walk back into the store felt much longer than the walk out. The bright, white light of the entryway seemed harsher now, accusing. Anya's mind, a moment ago flying high on a potential case break, was now crashing down, scrambling to piece together a mundane grocery trip. The two officers, Reed and Carson, flanked her, not roughly, but with a firm professionalism that made her skin prickle. She knew this procedure. She had written parts of it. But to be on this side of it was a strange and quiet shock. They guided her past the checkout lanes, where a few late-night shoppers stared openly, their faces a mix of curiosity and judgment. Anya kept her eyes forward, her back straight. She focused on breathing slowly. The manager, a tired-looking man with thinning hair, stood outside a small office door marked security. He gave the officers a brief, knowing nod. "She left without paying for the electronics item," he said, his voice flat. "We'd like to see your receipt." "Ma'am," Officer Reed said, holding out his hand. Anya pulled the crumpled slip from her bag. She watched his eyes scan down the list. Salad, water, flowers. His finger stopped. "There's no charger listed here." "I know," Anya said, her voice calm but firm. "There was a problem with the scanner. I was on the phone, distracted. It was a mistake. It's right here in the bag. I'll pay for it right now." She reached into the plastic bag and pulled out the small box charger. Placing it on the manager's desk, the manager picked it up. "That's a $35 item. The scanner problem is why we have an attendant." "You should have waited." "I understand," Anya replied, meeting his gaze. "It was an error. I am happy to pay for it, plus any fee. I was distracted by an important work call." She reached for her wallet again. Officer Carson spoke up. "Ma'am, we're going to need to see some identification, please." This was the moment. Her heart gave a little thump. Her badge and her driver's license were buried in the very bottom of her large, messy satchel, the bag she used as a mobile office, filled with case files, notebooks, half-eaten packs of gum, and old receipts. Under the watchful eyes of the two officers and the manager, she began to unpack it onto the desk. A notepad, a file folder with cold case typed on the tab, a spare pen, a tin of mints. The mundane debris of her long day tumbled out, making her feel exposed. "It's in here somewhere," she said, a flicker of frustration in her voice as she dug deeper. "Take your time," Officer Reed said, but his tone had changed. The sight of the cold case folder had registered. He exchanged a quick glance with Carson. Was she a lawyer? A reporter? Finally, her fingers closed around the hard leather of her badge holder. But as she pulled it out, a stack of papers came with it, spilling across the desk. In the flurry of grabbing them, the badge holder slipped from her grip and fell, not onto the desk, but into the half-open mouth of her satchel, disappearing back into the dark clutter. "Look," Anya said, her composure wearing thin. "My name's Captain Anya Mitchell. I command the 12th District Precinct. My badge is in there. My ID is in there. This is a complete waste of everyone's time." She said it with the authority she used in her own briefing room. The manager's eyebrows went up. Officer Carson gave a small, almost imperceptible snort of disbelief. Officer Reed's face was a mask of polite skepticism. "The 'I'm a cop' line is the oldest one in the book, ma'am," he said, repeating a phrase he'd heard older officers use 100 times. "We still need to see the physical ID, and given the value of the item and the circumstance, we're going to have to proceed with a custodial detention for suspected theft." The words landed like physical blows. Custodial detention. She was being arrested for a $35 charger she was trying to pay for. The absurdity of it was a hot, tight ball in her chest. "You are making a very serious error," she said, her voice low and icy. "Call your watch commander. Right now. Tell him you have Captain Mitchell in custody." "We'll sort all that out at the precinct, ma'am," Carson said, his voice taking on the routine tone of an officer who has heard every story under the sun. He produced a set of flexible plastic handcuffs. "Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." For a split second, Anya considered resisting. Not fighting, but refusing, commanding. But every bit of her training screamed against it. Escalation here, in a grocery store office, would be a disaster. It would confirm every suspicion they had. The humiliation was a fire in her veins, but she doused it with the cold water of procedure. She had spent a career upholding the system, even when it was flawed. Now she had to trust it, painfully, to work. She turned around. The plastic cuffs were cool and tight around her wrists. The feeling was one of utter surrealism. She, who had put violent criminals in steel restraints, was now standing in cuffs made of plastic over a phone charger. They led her out a back exit to avoid the main store. A small mercy that also felt like an accusation. The night air hit her face again as they guided her into the back of their patrol car. The cage door shut with a heavy metallic clunk that echoed in the silence. She was in the back seat of one of her own department's cars, as they drove. The radio chattered with familiar codes and voices. She heard the dispatcher she'd had coffee with that morning. She saw the streets she drove every day. From this angle, through the thick plexiglass, everything looked different, smaller, colder. Officer Reed spoke from the front passenger seat, his voice formal. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Anya tuned out the Miranda warning. She knew it by heart. Instead, she looked out the window at the passing city. The anger was still there, a hard knot. But underneath it, a deeper, more profound feeling was taking root. A weary, devastating understanding. She realized, with absolute clarity, that if she looked different, if her skin were a different shade, if her hair were a different texture, this night would have ended the same way. The mistake, the distraction, would have been irrelevant. In their eyes, from the moment they saw her in that parking lot, she was a shoplifter. And nothing she said, short of producing that buried badge, was going to change their minds. The car pulled into the secure bay of the 12th District Precinct. Her precinct. The place where she gave orders. Where her name was on the door. The engine cut off. The two officers got out. As they opened the door to help her out, she looked up at the familiar fluorescent lights of the booking garage. The final layer of her long, terrible day settled over her. The real work, the humiliating, slow machinery of the system she commanded, was about to begin. The fluorescent lights of the precinct garage buzzed with a sickly greenish tint. Anya had never seen them from this angle from the back seat of a patrol car, looking up through the wire cage. The heavy door clunked open, and Officer Carson offered a hand to help her out. She ignored it, maneuvering herself awkwardly, with her hands still secured behind her back. The plastic cuffs bit into her wrists. The air in the garage smelled of gasoline, stale coffee, and concrete dust. "This way, ma'am," Officer Reed said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. He led her not towards the main hallway that led to the detective bullpen and her office, but down a shorter, quieter corridor to the booking desk. It was a part of the precinct she seldom visited, a realm of procedure handled by clerks and uniformed officers. Tonight, a lone desk sergeant sat behind the thick plexiglass, his head bent over some paperwork. The scene was almost comically routine. The sergeant, a veteran with a tired face and close-cropped gray hair, didn't even look up at first. "Evening, gents. What have you got?" "Shoplift," Reed said, placing Anya's plastic grocery bag on the counter. "Electronics item. $35. She says it was a scanner error." Finally, the sergeant looked up. His eyes, pale and watery, passed over Anya's face, her hoodie, her bound hands. There was no flicker of recognition, just the flat gaze of a man processing the 10th minor offense of his shift. "Name?" Anya took a steadying breath. "Captain Anya Mitchell." The sergeant's pen paused. He looked at her again, then at the two young officers, and a slow, skeptical smile touched his lips. He'd heard it all. "Right. And I'm the police commissioner." "Your real name, please." "That is my real name," Anya said, her voice straining to remain level. "I am the commanding officer of this precinct. My badge and ID are in my bag. If you would just let me retrieve them, we can end this farce." Officer Carson shifted his weight. "She's been saying that since we picked her up, Sarge. Won't produce any ID." The sergeant sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "Standard procedure. Until we have positive ID, we process as a Jane Doe. You know the drill." He pushed a form towards Reed. "Start the paperwork." "You," he said to Anya, "empty your pockets onto the counter." Gently. The humiliation was a physical heat, climbing from her chest to her throat. In her own building, surrounded by people whose paychecks she signed, she was being treated like a common suspect. With clumsy fingers, she managed to pull her phone from her hoodie pocket. Her keys, a single wrinkled tissue. Each item felt like a piece of her dignity being laid bare. "Place your fingers here for prints," the sergeant instructed, sliding a digital scanner towards her. "This is ridiculous," Anya whispered, more to herself than to him. But she complied, pressing each finger against the cool glass. The machine beeped softly, capturing her identity into the very system she oversaw. "Okay, step over there. Face the wall for the photograph." She stood against the cinder block wall, which was painted a grimy off-white. A camera on a tripod flashed once, twice. The burst of light left spots in her vision. In that moment, she wasn't a captain with 15 years on the force. She was a statistic, a mugshot, a number in a queue. "Cells open. Put her in holding 3 until we verify," the sergeant said, waving a hand toward a heavy metal door. The holding cell was a small, square room with a concrete bench bolted to the wall and a stainless steel toilet in the corner. The door, made of solid steel with a small, wire-reinforced window, shut behind her with a sound of terrible finality. The lock engaged with a loud clack-thunk. Alone, the silence was deafening. She could hear the distant murmur of the dispatch radio, the faint clack of a keyboard, normal sounds of her precinct. But from in here, they sounded alien, mocking. She sat on the hard bench, her shoulders aching from the awkward position of her bound hands. She closed her eyes, trying to slow her racing heart, to think past the hot wave of anger and shame got asterisk think. What's the procedure? The watch commander on duty would be Lieutenant Vargas. A good man, a bit by the book, but fair. He did his rounds of the precinct every hour. Surely he would check the booking log. Surely he would see the name Mitchell or Jane Doe and come to investigate. Minutes. The pounding footsteps were a drumbeat of panic coming down the hall. Inside the holding cell, Anya heard them. They were too fast, too heavy for the usual nightly rounds. She stood up from the concrete bench, her body stiff, her hands still. Trapped behind her back dot, the footsteps stopped right outside her door. There was a jangle of keys, a fumbling, clumsy sound as someone tried to find the right one. Finally, the lock turned with a sharp clack. The heavy steel door swung open. Sergeant Wilkes stood in the doorway, his face as pale as the walls. In his hand, held out like a peace offering or a guilty confession, was her open badge wallet. The gold shield and the captain's star caught. The harsh hallway light dot behind him. Crammed into the corridor were Officers Reed and Carson. Reed looked like he might be sick. Carson's eyes were wide, fixed on the floor, unable to meet her gaze. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the distant, tinny voice from a radio down the hall. Anya looked from her badge to the sergeant's face, then to the two young officers. The volcanic anger was there, a white-hot core inside her, but on top of it was a layer of ice-cold control. She was no longer a detainee. She was the captain. "Sergeant," she said, her voice quiet but clear. It wasn't a greeting. It was an acknowledgement of a changed reality. "Captain Mitchell," Wilkes said, the words thick in his throat. There's been a terrible error." He stepped forward, his hands moving to a small utility knife on his belt. "Let me get those cuffs off." "No," Anya said. The single word hung in the small, cold room. Wilkes froze, his hands in mid-air. The two officers flinched. "Not yet," Anya continued, her eyes locking on Reed and Carson. "You too. You place these restraints. You will remove them." It was a small thing, a tiny point of procedure. But it was everything. They had to undo what they had done. They had to feel the weight of the action reversed. Reed moved first, his steps slow, like walking through deep water. He pulled out his own knife, his hands trembling slightly. He stepped behind her. Anya could hear his ragged breath. The plastic gave way with a quiet snick. The pressure released from her wrists. She brought her arms forward slowly, rubbing the deep red marks on her skin. The feeling of the blood rushing back was a sharp, tingling pain. She took her badge wallet from Sergeant Wilkes's still outstretched hand. The metal was cool and familiar. She didn't clip it to her hoodie. She simply held it. "My office," she said, looking at Reed and Carson. "Now, Sergeant Wilkes, alert Lieutenant Vargas. I need to see him immediately. And bring all the paperwork from this incident." She walked out of the cell, not looking back to see if they followed. She led the way, a woman in a worn hoodie and jeans, moving through the precinct with the absolute authority of a general. Patrol officers coming off shift saw the strange procession. Their captain, stone-faced, holding her badge, followed by two ashen-faced rookies and a grim sergeant. Conversations died. People stopped and stared. The door to her office was closed. She opened it, walked behind her large, orderly desk, and sat down. She placed her badge on the blotter in front of her, centering it carefully. Only then did she look up. Reed and Carson stood just inside the door, looking like schoolboys sent to the principal. A moment later, Lieutenant Vargas rushed in. He was a tall, wiry man with sharp eyes. He took in the scene, the captain's fury. Held in check, the two terrified officers. Wilkes hovering with a file folder. "Captain?" Sergeant Wilkes said it was urgent. "What's happened?" "Close the door, Lieutenant," Anya said. Vargas did. The click of the latch was final. "Officers," Anya began, her voice terrifyingly calm. "Explain to Lieutenant Vargas what transpired. Tonight, from the beginning. Do not leave out a single detail." Reed's voice was a dry whisper at first. He cleared his throat. "We were on theft deterrent patrol at the food mart on 8th. The loss prevention officer indicated a suspect, indicated this. Indicated Captain Mitchell was leaving without paying for an item. We approached. She was on the phone. She was dismissive. We escorted her inside. Carson picked up, his words tumbling over each other. She said it was a scanner error. She offered to pay, but she couldn't produce ID. She said she was a cop. We didn't believe her. It's a common excuse. We proceeded with the detention. You placed me in plastic cuffs," Anya stated, no question in her tone. "Yes, Captain. You transported me here. You read me my rights." "Yes, Captain." "You booked me. You fingerprinted me. You photographed me. You placed me in a holding cell." She listed each step slowly, like dropping stones into a still pond. "Yes, Captain." The words were barely audible. Lieutenant Vargas had listened, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to a kind of horrified understanding. He looked at Anya, at the marks still visible on her wrists. "My God," he breathed. Anya leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk, her steepled fingers touching her lips. The room was silent, except for the hum of the computer. "Saw a woman in a hoodie," she said, her eyes moving between the two officers. "You saw a black woman in a hoodie in a grocery store parking lot at night. You saw a pattern where there was only a person buying a salad and flowers after a 14-hour day. You heard an explanation and dismissed it as a line. You saw a lack of immediate compliance as defiance." She paused, letting each sentence sink in. "At no point did you de-escalate. At no point did you consider that your suspicion might be wrong. You were certain. You were so certain, you handcuffed and jailed your own commanding officer." Reed opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "This is not just about me," Anya continued, her voice gaining a new, harder edge. She turned to Vargas. "Lieutenant, poll the stop and detain stats for the last quarter. For this precinct. Break it down by perceived race." Vargas, knowing exactly where this was going, gave a tight nod. "This is a systems failure," Anya said, looking back at Reed and Carson. "You are part of that system. Your actions tonight are not a bizarre coincidence. They are the natural result of a bias you have not been trained to see in yourselves. You didn't see a captain. You didn't see a person. You saw a shoplifter. And the only reason this is ending differently tonight is because I am the captain. Imagine if I weren't. Where would I be right now?" The question hung in the air. Heavy, an unanswerable dot. She stood up. "You are both suspended, effective immediately. Not for disrespect to me. For a fundamental failure in procedure, judgment, and duty. You will await a full internal review." She then looked at Vargas and Wilkes. "I want that data on my desk by 0800, and I want every piece of paperwork from tonight. The receipt, the incident report, the booking forms, the digital prints, the photograph. All of it. She finally picked up her badge from the desk. She looked at it, then at the two shattered young men before her. The fury was still there, but it had been forged into something else, a steely, unshakable resolve. "Dismissed," she said. They filed out, the door shutting softly behind them. Alone in her office, Anya Mitchell finally sank into her chair. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a deep, hollow exhaustion. She looked at the bouquet of sunflowers, still in the grocery bag on the floor by her desk, their yellow heads bright. And oblivious. She put her face in her hands, not crying, just breathing. Sitting in the silent heart of the storm, she now had to somehow calm. The morning sun streamed through the blinds of Captain Anya Mitchell's office, painting stripes of light across the cold case file still open on her desk. She hadn't gone home. She had spent the remaining hours of the night at her desk, the quiet hum of the empty precinct her only company. She drank bad coffee and stared at the data Lieutenant Vargas had delivered just before dawn. The numbers were not a surprise, but seeing them laid out so starkly in the wake of her own night was a physical blow. Stop and detain incidents in the precinct were disproportionately high for Black and Latino residents, especially for low-level discretionary calls like shoplifting suspicions. The perceived threat assessment box was checked far more often for people of color. It was a pattern, a blueprint for what had happened to her. She looked at the other documents on her desk. Her own booking photo stared back at her. In it, her eyes were tired, her mouth a flat, resigned line. It was the face of someone who had given up explaining. Next to it was the store receipt and the incident report written by Officer Reed. The language was neutral, procedural, utterly failing to capture the human reality of that manager's office. The plastic cuffs, the cold bench in the cell. A soft knock at the door broke her thoughts. Lieutenant Vargas entered, holding 2 fresh cups of coffee. He placed one on her desk. "No one's sleeping," he said quietly. Word spread. The whole precinct is walking on eggshells. Anya nodded, taking the coffee. Good. They should be uncomfortable. "The review board is convened for 10, Vargas said. "Officers Reed and Carson are already here. They look like they haven't slept a wink." Anya sipped the hot, bitter liquid. "This isn't just about the men," she said, using his first name. "This is about every officer who's ever rushed to judgment. This is about the data on this desk. Firing 2 rookies doesn't fix a broken system. It just makes us feel like we've done something. So what's the play, Captain?" Vargas asked, sitting down across from her. Anya was silent for a long moment. She looked at her own mugshot again. "We make this mean something." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The review board was not a public hearing. It was held in the precinct's largest conference room. Seated at the table were Anya, Vargas, a union representative, and a senior officer from Internal Affairs. Officers Reed and Carson sat in chairs. Facing them, their uniforms crisp, but their faces hollow, the union rep started with procedural defenses. "My officers followed established protocol for a suspected theft with non-compliance. The failure to produce ID." Anya held up a hand, stopping. "Him." She slid a photograph across the table. It was the bouquet of sunflowers, now in a vase on her desk. "Do you know what this is?" she asked Reed and Carson. They glanced at it, confused. "Flowers, Captain," Reed said, his voice hoarse. They were. "A peace offering," Anya said. "For my wife, because I missed another dinner. I was buying a salad, water, and these flowers because I was tired and hungry and guilty for working too much." She then slid the store receipt next to it. The total was $11.84. Does that sound like the premeditated theft of a $35 charger? Or does it sound like a distracted, exhausted person making a mistake at a self-checkout? She didn't wait for an answer. She slid the data packet towards them. "You saw a pattern." But you were reading the pattern all wrong. The real pattern is in these numbers. It shows who we are more likely to suspect, to detain, to see as a threat. For minor issues, you two didn't invent this last night. You just acted it out, with me as the unlucky stand-in. The Internal Affairs officer spoke. Captain, the recommended action is a 6-month suspension without pay for both officers, followed by retraining. Anya looked at Reed and Carson. She saw fear there and shame. But was there understanding? No, Anya said, and the room froze. The union rep's eyes widened. Suspension is a punishment. It doesn't create change. It makes them victims of a political decision and lets everyone else off the hook. She leaned forward, addressing the two officers directly. You are hereby reassigned, effective immediately. Your new duty is to lead a 6-month review of our stop, detain, and use of force procedures. A stunned silence filled the room. You will dig into this data, Anya continued, her voice leaving no room for argument. You will sit with community leaders and hear their experiences. You will interview every person in this precinct who was on the receiving end of one of these stops. You will then help redesign our training from the ground up. You will help teach the next roll call. You will face every day what your assumptions can do. Reed finally found his voice. Captain ... Why? Why would you trust us with that? Because you owe a debt, Anya said plainly. Not just to me, to every person your bias might ever touch. And because if you truly understand what you did last night, you are now the most qualified people in this building to help fix it. Fire you, and you learn nothing. Make you part of the solution, and you might actually teach us all something. She stood up, ending the meeting. The choice is yours. You can accept the reassignment, or you can resign. But understand this, the story of what happened last night will not be buried. I will be holding a press conference this afternoon. Asterisk, 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 the press room was packed. News of the Captain Detained story had leaked, buzzing through the city. Anya stood at the podium, not in her dress uniform, but in a simple blazer. On the table beside her were 2 items, the vibrant sunflowers and a framed copy of her booking photograph. She didn't talk about her feelings. She didn't vilify the officers. She stated the facts, simply and clearly. She held up her photo. This is what a system's failure looks like, she said to the flashing cameras. It looks like me. If it can happen to me, a precinct captain with a badge in her bag, imagine how often it happens to people without my resources, without my voice. She announced the new precinct initiative, a top-to-bottom review led by the very officers involved. She announced mandatory immersive bias interruption training for the entire department, starting with command staff. We don't need more excuses, she said, her voice firm and clear. We need more humanity. We need to see people, not patterns. Later that night, finally home, she placed the sunflowers on the kitchen table. Her wife hugged her for a long, long time, saying nothing. There were no words needed. Back at the precinct, the graveyard shift came on. The mood was different, heavier, but thoughtful. In the report room, Officers Reed and Carson were already at work, boxes of old case files around them. They weren't talking much. Reed was staring at a spreadsheet, the column of racial demographics glaring back at him. Carson was reading a complaint filed months earlier by a young man whose story sounded painfully familiar. It was quiet, hard work, the kind of work that doesn't make headlines after the first day. It was the slow, unglamorous process of building, something new from the pieces of a terrible mistake. Anya Mitchell, at her kitchen table, knew the road would be long. But for the first time, since she heard the handcuffs click behind her back, she felt a flicker of something other than anger or fatigue. It was a fragile, cautious sense of purpose. The long night was over. The real work had just begun.